Aloha, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Know Your Ocean speaker series. As always, we're going to give a few minutes for everybody to get from the waiting room into the webinar, and then we will go ahead and get started with tonight's speaker, Evelyn Tickle. So mahalo for your patience. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with our webinar tonight. Aloha, everyone. Mahalo for joining with us. I'm Sarah, and I will be the host for the evening. Tonight, we are joined by Evelyn Tickle of Grow Oyster Reefs. And tonight's Evelyn's talk is titled Fabricating Biodiversity through Multi-Species Cooperation. And Evelyn will share with us how she is using her 20 plus years of experience in biomimetic design and concrete fabrication to tackle the work of reef restoration around the world. She is the inventor of biophilic concrete and other patented restoration products, which have been tested by the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, or VIMS, and has installed them in the Gulf of Mexico, Chesapeake Bay, and along the northeastern seaboard of the United States and the south coast of the UK. So very excited to have Evelyn with us tonight. And as always, we want to mahalo the County of Maui for being such a great sponsor and partner and being able to present these educational we love free talks as well. So as a quick side note, if it is your first time with us and you'd like to stay updated on future talks or even events with our organization, please make sure to sign up for, it's called the Reef and Brief, which is our once a month e-newsletter that will keep you updated on all of the events and everything else that's going on with MNMRC. And so if this is your first time tonight, we are Maui Nui Marine Resource Council. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we work for clean ocean water, healthy coral reefs, and abundant native fish. And we have been doing this since 2007, so it's been a while. But we believe that healthy coral reefs mean healthy communities. And, living on an island, everything is connected. So a lot of our efforts do range from not only in the water, like you see in this picture, but also on Mauka, from Mauka to Makai on land as well. And so this includes doing many things. So some things mentioned here, we test water quality at 39 plus locations on Maui. We regularly monitor local fish and reef health. And most recently, we provide training to landscaping professionals, property managers, to use natural alternatives to toxic herbicides and pesticides. Speaking of which, we're really excited to share that our first group of students in our reef-friendly landscaping certification program, they have just graduated. Here's a photo of the lovely folks right here. This course is designed to help landscaping professionals, property managers, and agricultural businesses to adopt natural land care practices that are just better for plant life. And bonus, it's good for the reefs as well. So our next class is going to be starting up in August. So if you yourself are a professional, or if you want to see your landscaping provider provide this service to you, let them know that this course is available to you. It's to them, it's a 5-day course, but it's a short course, but the impacts will be very long lasting and so well worth your time. So and of course, we wanted to also mention, who doesn't love chocolate? Chocolate and reefs doesn't always make the most obvious pairing, but we all love Ku'ia Estate Chocolate, and they are a wonderful company out in Lahaina, and they will be donating 100% of their chocolate factory tour proceeds to MNMRC. This is going to be for all of the tours that take place on Sunday, July 7th. So we actually had one back in May, right before Mother's Day. So I hope some of you got mom a very tasty gift. But if you missed it, because there are limited spots, we've got one more Sunday this year where all of the proceeds are going to benefit us. So please go ahead. There's a link in the chat for you to go ahead and book that tour. And I'm not going to lie, I did check this afternoon and it said there's only 2 spots left. But I did hear a rumor that if there's enough interest, they might open up another time slot as well. Either way, if you love chocolate and you want to help support the reefs, this is a wonderful way to do it and support a local business as well. So before we get started tonight, just a few notes. So we will leave time at the end as usual for Q&A. So please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the webinar, the little panel there to submit your questions at any time through the presentation. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, feel free to just comment, leave a comment, and those questions will be relayed to me, and we'll go ahead and save them for the end of our time together. And if you have to jump off early for whatever reason, or you want to share this talk because it was so amazing tonight, we will be posting it to our YouTube channel. It will be on Facebook right after the webinar ends. So, feel free to share, to revisit, and those things will be available to you after the presentation tonight. So now for our speaker, Evelyn is internationally recognized as a leader in coastal resilience and aquatic ecosystem restoration. Hi. She is a fellow of the American Academy in Rome and was educated as an architect at SciArc in Los Angeles. She's an expert in biomimetic design and concrete fabrication. Evelyn invented Grow Oyster Reefs, biophilic concrete, and patented reef restoration products. She's also very actively involved in initiatives in the US offshore wind industry, campaigning on the basis that clean energy must not be delivered at the expense of a dirty ocean. And just in January 2024, Grow Oyster Reefs was awarded the U.S. National Science Foundation Small Business Innovation Research and Development funding to evolve and scale the next generation of their biophilic concrete modular reef substrates, driving down costs, reducing embodied carbon, and increasing production capacity. I am intimidated already, but I'm excited at the same time. So Evelyn, thank you so much for being with us tonight, and mahalo, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm so excited about being here. And if I wasn't, I wouldn't be here because I'm on the East Coast in Virginia. And so it is quite late here. So we're looking at what, 11:40. And so here we go. And I'm excited to share the work. And thank you so much, Sarah and Jill, for running this and being so involved in doing the great work that you do. And I will share my screen now. And I'm also looking forward to answering any questions that you might have for sure. So, Hi, I'm Evelyn Tickle, as we said, and I wanted to take you through a little bit of a journey of a decade. And I promise I don't 100 slides, but I do have some images that I thought that you might find interesting as I talk you through the project and the work at hand. And so I like to introduce myself in the business with this particular image. It was an installation that I did sort of as an offhand approach to getting a what I call a pilot project in the water in the Gulf of Mexico off of the panhandle of Florida off of Grayton Beach. There was a call for, it was a first generation call for artists to do work that would go underwater for the first American underwater museum of art to generate tourism and to begin to make habitat in the water. And well, I'll tell you some more interesting stories about this particular piece, but it's sort of like Medusa's hair, and I'll show you the end results at the very end, which I was quite pleased with. So I started the company Grow Oyster Reefs in about 10 years ago, and my as mentioned, my first work was in concrete, and well, I designed houses before then, and I've poured concrete at many different scales of buildings. I invent different formulas for that and different technologies for that, and I co-founded a concrete company that worked to make beautiful concrete for the home and for the business, and that was at a time when people didn't really think that it was for much except for a lot of infrastructure or sidewalks, et cetera. So, and then I wanted to, when I moved out of that business, which is doing quite well even today, I wanted to invent a more environmentally good concrete. I believe that concrete has a lot of potential, and that I didn't know what it was, but my work in biomimicry made me think that I could possibly come up with some ideas. So I had a small sailboat, and I know many of you are probably really good sailors, but I am not. And so I sat in the marina quite a bit and had like a lab, and I had some kayaks and stuff I would go out on most of the time. And I was in the middle of the salt ponds, which were in the Chesapeake Bay, which were filled, believe it or not, with oysters and lots of seagrasses and clams and mussels. And I fell in love with them. I was normally a sea person. I mean, I went to the beach and I surfed a little bit, and that was my home, but I hadn't been in the Back Bay as much. And the Chesapeake Bay is the second largest bay in the world, I believe, and the largest bay in America. So it hosts quite a bit of quite a bit of water. So I wanted to look at the oyster for inspiration. And the Chesapeake Bay, the reefs that I was looking at were not this formed. I'll show you in a moment, but I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the oyster reef, and it is in decline by 85% worldwide. It's considered a foundation species, so that means that if it's removed from our Earth structure is forever changed. It is the oyster reef is home to about 200 to 350 different species of different species, including young fish. So it is a haven and a nursery for young fish, and it could be one of the many reasons why we don't have so many fish in the water any longer, since they don't have any of the reefs to hide in. Oysters are fast growing in the eastern waters in the United States. In the Chesapeake Bay, they will grow to maturity in 1 year. Each oyster delivers about 1 million embryos into the water column, so they are quite prolific. And then it is and they grow in about 1 year. So as we can see, it has lots of potential to actually be regenerated, the reefs do. So this is considered a horizontal reef or a bed. Most of the reefs are just called oyster reefs at this point, but some grow upwards and some grow outwards, and their other job is to attenuate wave energy coming in. And this is a beautiful, really deep reef. This is the preference rather than just on the shoreline. So not unlike coral reefs, the water would be slowed down by the time it reached the shoreline. And since we're in decline, as well as the rest of the world by 85%, we begin to understand a little bit more about why our waters are so dirty, and that doesn't keep humans off the, from being able to excuse ourselves for creating so much dirty water in the first place. But this is a big reason, because we no longer have many of the estuaries filled with oysters in order to do their water filtering process. Little fun fact is that the Chesapeake Bay, in about 3.7 days before colonization, could clean all of the water in the Chesapeake Bay before delivering clean water into the Atlantic Ocean. So that gives us a little bit of perspective. And in today's world, it would take like 790 days in order to do that. Although I do believe that the Chesapeake Bay is making great strides. And I'm based in Charlottesville, Virginia, close to the Chesapeake Bay. That's where Grow Oyster Reefs is headquartered. And we are also in Los Angeles. So breaking into the market and beginning to work on some reefs in California. We just started going yesterday in California for Elkhorn Slough, which has lots of mud, and I'll show you a picture of that. So ideally, we will restore our reefs because they have so much promise, and they take care of the earth so well, and not just above the water. They're structuring the earth under the water as well. They keep the body, and they keep the shores from slipping away, and they keep the silt in place on the land side, as well as the silt in place and the sand in place on the water side. So as I was on this little Ranger sailboat sitting there, I spent a lot of time watching and thinking and drawing, and I started watching the reefs begin to form themselves. And so this was relatively muddy, as you can see. And so the reefs typically started, as you can see on the bottom left, about 18 inches apart, and they grew up into these clumps you're seeing above that. And I love and could really relate to the architectural feats that they would do. So they would, the oysters begin to come up vertically out of the mud and structure themselves, but then they begin to buttress across next to each other. So they begin to hold that other oyster up. And then they begin to there's a top plate one, they nearly sacrifice themselves and become like a horizontal plate in a house. And then the oysters, we're beginning to see in the top left photograph, that they begin to branch out into what we call cantilevers in the building world. And another clump is forming correct to the other side. And so those cantilevers they're sentient creatures as well. So they're sensing each other, and they're working towards making a structural connection in an arch. And so that's how the reef begins to be formed. So the oyster shell in itself that we're seeing above that is a critical player, just like the animal the oyster is in filtering the water. The oyster shell itself actually performs, and ideally in a reef, like a big Tums in the water. So it does a lot of ocean alkalinity enhancement, which is part of the carbon story here. It's like putting a big Tums in the water. And so what I decided to do was I wanted to formulate a concrete that could match that of the oyster shell, since we're in such decline, and we could possibly use that to regenerate the reefs. And so that was my inspiration. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a little while. But where the red arrow is pointing down to, and there's small circles on there, that is those are baby oysters forming. They're called spat. And the oyster shell is very interesting. Each one is different unto itself. It's a beautiful structural feature because it's cupped, and and the bivalve works together. So they make quite a beautiful structure unto themselves, and it's very strong. But they also, as you are probably aware of eating wonderful oysters on the half shell, hopefully, that the oyster shell has lots of nooks and crannies and surface area on there. And that is where the embryonic oyster, which is like a pinhead size, it needs that articulation in the shell in order to find a place where it stays for the rest of its life. And ideally, we're in an oyster reef, right? So this embryonic oyster is floating around in the reef, finds a forever home. It actually develops a foot in a certain stage, which makes it heavier. And with that singular foot, it can climb up the reef and find this particular space that it likes on another oyster shell. And from there, it grows out. And this was my first product in the middle there. I was originally just testing my concrete formula, and I wanted to be able to give the oysters in this concrete the best opportunity possible. So I developed something that looked like the oyster reef, and I did a scientific test that was compared to, I set it up just as I set up the concrete version of it in with shell. And I tested those side by side in the Chesapeake Bay, and the shell one was kind of what I expected. And I'm sorry I don't have any photographs here, but then this is the one that I pulled up a little at 12 months, and then I left it in for a little bit more growth towards 15 months. And when I pulled it up, it had a whole host of different species living in it, and the oysters were completely formed. The shells looked beautiful, very little predator action happening on it, and we had small crabs and small fish and all sorts of beautiful. It was like pulling up this bouquet, and it was at that point that I decided that I was going to start a business, because I just felt like it was so successful and had so much promise to help us regenerate a very valuable ecosystem. And the mangroves that we're seeing on the right-hand side, I looked at those as well, kind of before, and this is, this went on for 10 to 12 years and my research. And so I was kind of a little bit of, maybe not for you all in Hawaii, but a little bit ahead of the game, looking at the prop roots as understanding that those are spaces that the oysters inhabit. Those are also spaces of water attenuation and protection for the shoreline. So the product that you saw in the beginning with the tangled up Medusa hair looking project is called the reef tangle that you're seeing over on the right-hand side. So that crazy looking thing was built up of these spherical units. I had another idea for those to be able to make this underwater room that would form with corals and sponges and whatnot, that was open at the top and could be like a dive-through room. Only was allowed a 4-foot by 8-foot shape. And so the what I call the big reef tangle worked pretty well. So the concrete formula is here. So I've patented the concrete and the products. The reef tile is our big reef builder, and that has grown up since the single version, the lower one that I just showed you, because oysters have more nutrients higher in the water. And the reef tile is situated so that it takes the first 1 to 5 years off of the life of the oyster trying to form its own reef. It supplements and acts like a reef. As soon as it's deployed, it attenuates wave energy. The concrete formula starts the ocean alkalinity enhancement process in advance of the oyster, and it also sends out chemical cues like the oyster does to beckon a species to the reef. And then it sets the oyster up to grow in its own natural formation. It grows off the bottom plate, which provides a nice suction to the floor, as holes on the inside, which I developed a little bit later. I'll show you those. And then it allows the oyster to grow off of the reef tile. And the big success for me is when the reef tile is actually covered in oysters, and it takes off and does its own work at that point. And if anything happens, such as disease or storms, etc., the reef tile is still there, and we can regenerate that process. They're modular. They weigh about 33 pounds, and you can pick them up and move them around and use them to reseed another place. And the small product called the reef disc goes on ropes, and it can also be used individually. It could be used at a hatchery to be pre-seeded with baby oysters to begin to put these in between the rocks of a riprap jetty, etc., to begin to turn those into an oyster habitat. The oysters are self-healing organisms, and they will help keep an existing riprap or even a wall intact. So they have many different options. And the little spat catcher is a little bit of the hero in here. It's used in aquaculture, and so it's used to begin to, if there are embryonic oysters in the water, to catch those oysters down into the water column, and then broken apart, and the aquaculture community can use those baby oysters in their own system and take off the first top 30% of the investment that they have. So the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, I took a risk there, and I wanted to make sure that we were properly testing, and they have us at 50 to 100 oysters per square foot in the first year. we develop, our product develops because of the concrete formula, as well as a porous design. We develop a stronger oyster and a faster oyster within the first year, and then after that, it goes into its normal growing pattern. So that's really important for multiple reasons, but one of those is because the oyster has it's most vulnerable within that first year of growth. It has a softer shell at some point as well. So I'm very excited about those results, and still working with the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. So one of the parts of the reef generation work that we do is that, who will pay for the reefs to be regenerated. And so part of the work as a business, and I've purposely chosen to be a for-profit business because I believe that will help regenerate the reefs faster than if I was a nonprofit organization. Not that I don't want a nonprofit arm at some point, but so the carbon market is a good place to start. And so we're in scientific testing with the Smith Marine Technology Partners to work with oysters and seagrasses, which are companion species. There are many places in America that have forgotten that they are companion species and disallow them at the level of the city or the community as far as permitting goes, and do not allow them to actually come close to each other or touch each other. So we are testing to see how they benefit each other so that we can deliver some papers and to begin to change those rules, but also the information that we have on the carbon sequestration is stronger with the oysters and the seagrasses planted together. So these are the results that we have from this slide is actually about 2 years old, and we have updated information on the oysters. But if we took the same tract of the same amount of space and planted trees on those, it takes a while to grow, right? So our trees are very precious, and it takes the oysters a lot less time to grow. So we can start delivering, the burying carbon, right after the first year. And the papers that we have now are coming in at like 2.4 metric tons per acre per year, starting at year 2. So that has a lot of potential. And so the reef layouts that I prefer are what we saw earlier with this wide reef. So these little squares are the reef tiles, and I don't like to put them together necessarily, like covering a full field, because they grow off of the reef. They grow off of the reef tile and onto the seabed. And then I like to begin to leave room for the seagrasses. We've been planting seagrasses, and then also VIMS also believes in seeding the seagrasses as well. So we're working with both of those types of solutions for the testing with Smith Marine at the University of Florida and the Gulf of Mexico with Dauphin Island Sea Lab, and the Alabama section further west in the Gulf of Mexico, as well as in the Chesapeake Bay. So this is a reef tile looking down on it, as in one of our versions on the left-hand side. The holes work for different reasons to pull out a little bit more of the concrete to begin to open up these holes that I keep talking about. And then also oysters tend to really love holes, so I wanted to put those in just to give them a little bit more space. And then also the holes are very handy if we're hanging or doing something else with them. And then this is one of the more recent images that I have after testing. And I just think that they're so incredibly beautiful as they cover the reef tile, which is down under there, believe it or not. So I'm happy with the work. I'm pleased with the reef tile. We are doing a little bit of a simplification version so that we can produce more with a biomimetic mold using an industry that is closer to the site, so we can get rid of the shipping costs and to lower the carbon footprint and the cost of the unit to something that is close to business as usual, and coming in hopefully at $15 a unit instead of 50. So here we are in this closer look at the oysters. You can begin to see the differentiation of the shells and how they begin to form, and and like some of these have like broken off because a kayak came through or whatever, but they continue to grow. And that's the beauty of having the substrate underneath, is that it doesn't completely in this vulnerable stage just decimate a reef if someone knocks into it, right? But the articulation of the shells, I think, is really beautiful to the degree that when I was originally supposed to do this lecture earlier on, and I was in France, and I just I took a break after 10 years of working nearly every day and every night on the project, and wanted to do a little bit more creative work in order to help me focus. And I wanted to work on more concrete formulas with natural materials, and test some ways to change the cement out of there. We use very, very little cement, but I also wanted to see if we could begin to remove that as well. So I made about 50 new concrete formulas that I'm really excited about and hope to publish pretty soon. But then you can tell I'm really I'm very interested in the articulation of those surfaces where the oysters will begin to be. And so the more I study those and the more I test them and learn about them, the better the product becomes. And I'm just really excited about the work that I did too there. So I thought I would show it to you. So this is an installation with the reef tile. This is a University of Florida installation. So these, I love these because they're quite frankly, I think they're beautiful. They look very different than the engineered products that are primarily out on the market, such as one that looks like a concrete block, and they look like a reef. The profile is very natural, and so, yeah, so this was a community install, which is terrific. And then on the right-hand side, we're seeing one of the scientists with the Nature Conservancy in Elkhorn, and sort of in between. It's kind of a little closer south of San Francisco, and that's an area that they're really trying on California's coast to begin to regenerate the oysters. So really excited that they're using our reef tiles for that project, and that's being deployed yesterday and today. So that image of that very cool scientist is hot off the press. So they're very handleable. So she has two of those in her hands and is walking them down, and yeah, so it's working pretty well. So the larger market, as I spoke to, really wanting to be able to, we need to build the reefs, and the communities are a great way to do it. And I also believe that, as the introduction said, that there are places that we really want to, especially moving forward with clean energy, that as the perhaps unavoidable destruction to the seabed happens, that we can use the opportunity to regenerate the ecosystems by protecting the foundations of the turbines, or doing this through the anchors if the offshore wind projects will be floating, and then also covering the cable arrays in between the turbines and then to the export cable. And for instance, Dominion Energy's project in Virginia has 220 miles of cabling that's from New York to DC. It's quite a lot of cabling. So we are working towards making an articulated reef mattress that goes over that cable with our reef tile, with our scaling project, and so that we can regenerate the reefs and protect the human infrastructure simultaneously. And with that comes deeper water, and working towards, and you'll see a little bit of the simplification of the reef tile and the drawing on the right-hand side, but that means working in the deep water. The other option to putting the cable covering on them with the reef mattresses is to dredge. And I'm sure you probably feel the same way I do about dredging, even though they say it's a thin pencil line, but they will cross over and cut through anything that's underneath. The vulnerable sponge reefs and the cold corals are off the Virginia coast. And so ideally, we are working towards helping to keep those going, because it's deep sea. Not many people know exactly what's under there, but I have to say I have a soft spot for the sponge reefs. They filter water as well and are incredibly colorful and beautiful. And so it would be great to be able to regenerate and to generate more cold corals and sponge reefs. So we've done a lot of work and we've had some big wins, and we've we've had some things that it didn't get. Then I was sad that that didn't happen. But our first project was with the Nature Conservancy in Maine, and primarily because the scientist Jeremy Bell fell in love with the reef tile and told me he wanted to hang it on his wall. And I said, well, I'd prefer if you'd put it underwater, you know. And so they did. And so we had our first sale to them, and they are still using the reef tiles. And we did validate the fact that we tested against natural shell, and they didn't really want the natural shell to lose, but they in that test, but they did tell me that the reef tile did really well, and that they weren't even expecting to have any results, because if they see one oyster in the water in Maine, they jump up and down. It's like a sighting. So and then went on to Rice Resilience Innovation, which is a little bit of the Sandy money handed down to other states. And that was our first grant. And so we did pilot projects and did the VIMS testing with them. We've worked with the University of Virginia, and our first reef, our first international pilot went in Portsmouth, England, where they are having to redo their riprap, or what they call rock arm or rock walls. And so the scientists are really working hard to being able to provide other infrastructure in there. We have a reef top wedge, which goes in between the riprap, in order to turn that pretty much non-performing biophilic rock wall or jetty into one that is actually covered in oysters and sea life, and the oysters, being self-healing organisms, will help to keep the stabilize the rocks as well. And then the project with the Smith Marine Technology. And then we have pitched with at the International Partnering Forum. And so we have to do a lot of these pitch events, which are very interesting. We've worked with Dominion Energy and their accelerator program, their business accelerator. We have proposed at the request of Crystal Sea, so some aquaculture farms, to do sustainability reefs in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, in order to regenerate the oysters there. And we are, as said, we're working on our NSF SBIR, working towards a massive scaling project so that we can produce a licensable mold to be able to work with communities who can license the mold and use a simple hand press, or to be able to license the mold into the larger concrete companies. And we have been nominated from several times for the Earthshot Prize. So that's England's Prince's big project, sort of inspired by the Moonshot Prize. And so this year we've made it into the not technically semifinals, but one step before that last year, and then we were nominated from the inside. So we've got our fingers crossed for some good results on that. So, you know, there's so many great people that are up for it. So I won't totally cry if we don't get it, but we are still helpful, and looking forward to, you know, doing the good work that we do. And let's see. Oh yes, and so I have the final slide tonight is the results of the first image of the large Medusa's hair with the reef tangle. And just to note that there, when you go scuba diving or whatever in the Gulf of Mexico, as well as, you know, in Los Angeles and any snorkeling in the shallower waters, there's not anything down there. I hardly see a fish ever in the Santa Monica Bay. And so this with our formula and the porous product, so there's a lot of water and that goes through this product. So it has sustained like 2 or 3 hurricanes. But these species, this generation, and this amount of growth of different species, not even including the fish that visit all the time, was generated over the course of just 1 year. So incredibly exciting results. And it was like a magnet as soon as it was put in, because it produces shade, it sends out the chemical cues. And so we were pretty excited about that. So that's it. Those are the slides that I have for you this evening, but I'm very open to any questions, and I will hand it over to Sarah and Jill. Thank you. And also, you can find me on social media. I have a very active LinkedIn page that is under my own name of Evelyn Tickle. I have an Instagram page for Grow Oyster Reefs. So I I'm a little behind on my posting by about a month, but I try to keep up with it. And we have a nice following there as well. So and on Facebook under Evelyn Tickle. So would love for you to follow us and to keep in touch, or you can email me off of the website page. So it's growoysterreefs.com or through LinkedIn. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. That was a lot. That was really cool. I'm still trying to like process all of it. We do have some questions. So I'm kind of trying to compile everything together. Okay. So first one was kind of early on. You mentioned something really interesting. Like you said that horizontal reefs, some grow up and some grow out.
Mhm.
What causes or influences like the direction that they grow in?
my my knowledge of that, although I am not a scientist, right? So my architectural skills and my understanding of the structural world that we live in is what I've relied on, as well as reading hundreds and hundreds of scientific papers. But the way that the depth of the water is one thing. So the oysters are going to grow up higher into the water column in order to reach those better nutrients for them. So that is part of what makes a more vertical reef. And then also, so in the wave energy right there, if it's coming in nice and slow, it's a nice shallow you know um situation, it's going to be more of a horizontal reef is my best guess. Now you should fact check me on that.
That's still, oh, I believe you. This was very convincing. Uh,
It makes sense. I'm
yeah.
pretty sure of it. But they were all called reefs.
Okay.
So they used to call them beds, like clam beds and oyster
Oh.
beds. And
Mhm.
yes, and but oyster reefs will also. I've been challenged on this several times. Um, in public, in places I didn't want to be challenged when I was doing a big presentation. But there are many scientists who don't believe that they grow in deep water, but yet there are some very, very ancient reefs off of the coast of Italy that are incredibly deep. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Okay. Next question. Does the reef tile provide any nutrients to baby oysters doing that? I know you mentioned that that first year can be challenging for oysters. Do the reef tile provide any nutrients during that first year of life?
Yes, very good question. So since the reef tile is like a surrogate, I think that's a good way to think about it. So it does what the oyster reef will do when it gets to be that size, but it does stand in. So what it's doing is that it is the high calcium carbonate formula is slowly, like the oyster shell and the oyster reef, is just adding a little bit of ocean alkalinity enhancement. So it's putting some of those nutrients in the water that are being then filtered by the oyster itself. So that's the scientific version of it. The oyster farmers have a little bit different opinion on it, and I love the fact that they have different opinions. Is that they believe that it's actually getting some of those nutrients that it's using to build its shell um, off of the substrate itself, just like they would with the oyster shell. So it depends on who you ask, but it could be a little bit of both.
Okay.
But yes, and that's and I met a scientist very early on in Woods Hole when I was taking part in the first my first international oyster symposium, and she said, well, I believe what's going to happen, Evelyn, is you're going to have a expansive first year of growth, and then it will settle off. And she was probably about 85 years old at that point. And I was like, I trust you. And her prediction was right. And that was because of the nutrients in the concrete and the high calcium carbonate.
Interesting. Okay.
Great question.
Yeah. Um, a general question. Curious you mentioned that you are based on the East Coast in Virginia, but you do also mention that you're out in LA,
Mhm.
in California. So where in California do you hope to kind of, see grow oyster reefs implemented or work? What conditions or environments do you look for when you're selecting sites to use the tiles?
So the very interesting part of one of the very interesting parts of the business is that I don't necessarily do the site selection. So people come to us. Even though I'm a little bit more than a material supplier, eventually will be that. But I'm a consultant for different firms that are doing work, et cetera. So I will help in the selection if asked, but a lot of times it's a scientist that's choosing the site for different reasons. So I'm hoping to be based. I'm talking to the Port of Los Angeles to be able to have a hub or a workshop, a place to show off the product and to do some testing at Alta Sea. And Alta Sea has finally taken off. It really was hit hard by COVID, but it is the reclaiming of the port for the community. It is where the climate tech work is going on, and I mean the port's huge, right? So it is happening in there. So I'm hoping to have a space in the Port of Los Angeles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah,
And,
and to do a
and
pilot there as well.
not to belabor the point, but and I know you mentioned that usually people come to you, they kind of already have a site in mind, but as people come to you, do you see any commonalities in the sites that are proposed or that you're asked to take a look at? Are there any kind of overlaps that would maybe indicate like, oh, these are the types of places that, this might be suited for?
Well, oyster reefs grow in a lot of, I mean, most places, and they were in most places. So the reason they're in decline by 85% was primarily because we did not take good care of the reefs after colonization. We
Mm.
ate too many, we knocked them down, they're in the way of the ships, they were this, they were that, and they were so plentiful that no one thought that they could ever be eradicated. And then
Wow.
with the changes, damming, up of the of the rivers, the estuaries being dammed. We can take Boston, for example. They had one of the most active oyster reefs, and one of the mayors made a speech that said Boston will never go hungry because of the oysters, which are incredibly nutritious. You can live off of 2 of them a day. And so they really have so much potential. But at any rate, they dammed it up because they said the estuary was smelly. It smelled in a very natural way, but now people go across the dam, which is also a bridge, and you have to hold your nose at sometimes. I mean, it is toxic. So
Wow.
as we know, we're trying to remove some of those dams and everything, but there are, I would say there are no bad places for oysters. The only thing that we have to kind of work with is a salinity level. For instance,
Mhm.
in the James River off of the Chesapeake Bay that goes up through the watershed in Virginia, there is a point, or it's more like a band that changes because of the salinity levels. So oysters, they can go
Wow.
very saline, or they in the estuaries, it's brackish water. So it's a mixture between fresh water and saline water. Um, so that band moves. So when we have all of the fresh water and the rains that happen, it actually affects the oyster population. So a lot of those oysters die that are in that band. So
Yeah.
really, really with the right situation and with the right placement and with the right conditions, whether we need to go to a hatchery to begin to seed some of the reef tiles or the reef discs in order to, if one does about 50% of the project or 25% of the project, just to make sure that we're going to have some success with that. Or unless you're doing it as a testing vehicle to see, are there any oysters in the water? And the reef discs are great for that as well. So I would say that, I'll add one more little piece of information. The oysters can be out of the water for 8 days in case of an emergency. That gives
Oh,
people time to move them, which is interesting too. But
interesting.
basically, a great place for them is like mean tide. So they'll be out of the water for a little while, and then they go under the water. Different species of oysters will prefer to be lower, and some prefer to be higher. But they're it's surprising that we've lost so many because they actually really thrive quite easily.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. Um,
Mhm.
I think you kind of already touched this, but somebody wanted to just say amazing work, many exclamation points after that. And just asking where can we follow the Elkhorn Slow project, which was it the same ways that you mentioned already? Is there somewhere specific for that?
I will post some photographs of it on the probably Instagram, and I do need to get a few things in place first because I want to make sure that the scientists are ready to go on that a little bit to
Sure.
be able to post those. But it is a very interesting project because it is such a difficult site. It's a beautiful site,
Mhm.
and then I'm personally working towards being able to get a pilot into the Santa Monica Bay. So that is one of my focuses. As you know, I say that I don't do this work, but sometimes I nudge a little bit and try to pull some things together. And and I would also like to see them go into the Venice canals and some of the canal areas to begin to help clean the water. And they do a great job. As they clean the water, the algae situation becomes less and less. So you know, those are some of my pet projects if I was to define them.
Okay, okay. Have you quantified the improvement in water quality as a result of oyster propagation from reef tiles?
Well, I rely on the general information for that. But I have to say it's been a big busy day. And I had an interview earlier um, with the environmental department of water, and they wanted to know what the nitrogen levels and the phosphorus levels
Mm,
are because they're very interested. And so we are testing for that. That is something that one of the VIMS scientists, one of the director actually said we should test for that
mm,
because we're hoping to have some really, some positive, results there. So we'll have more information at the end of 2024 on that. And then I forgot to tell y'all that I am doing some work with corals. SeaWorld's having a very difficult time getting them to reproduce in the lab. And so the reef disc, which has different surfaces on it, they're using that. And so we're hoping for some nice results. And then I also do a small tile that goes under the microscope. So we can do so scientists can do some different work on that. And so there are a couple of scientists at the University of Southern California that have some of those that they're working on. And then we're also doing some work with some predator proofing. A scientist that is involved with the boring sponge. That is when you find an oyster shell that has all the holes in it, they drill into it and then they eat the animal inside of it. And so one of the things that's happening on some of the restoration sites is they they use a lot of oyster shell. Oyster shell is in high demand and there is not much of it. So
mm,
ideally, we don't use that anymore. There have been some bad practices of blasting it out of the earth, which totally releases tons of carbon and changes the structure of the earth as well. So ideally, we don't do that anymore. But there's not a good set of best practices yet, which I'm hoping that someone else develops just because I don't want to have to do everything. But that would help a lot because people
yeah,
spend a lot of money and the oyster shells, when they
right.
disperse them into the water, they just are buried in the silt and it just takes some thinking about what happens in the future. But
Yeah.
one of the things, when they persist in doing that, one of the things that happens is they toss all these oyster shells with all of this spat out into the sea, hoping for the best, but it attracts the boring sponge very quickly because they are without habitat too. And so she believes that our substrates help with the boring sponge issue. So we'll have to stay tuned with that particular scientific experiment. But she's amazing. She's very interesting. She's at Occidental University.
Interesting. Okay. We've got about 5 more minutes, and I just want to, we still got some questions. You may not get to them all, but kind of on the topic that you were talking about, somebody did ask, like, how much better is the reef tile, or is there any noticeable difference in the tile attracting oyster babies versus other surfaces?
Yeah, we have very good attraction rates because of the porous condition. When you look down, which I showed you one of those images, one of the reasons for the placement of the towers, and also the smaller buttresses is so that within the water the embryonic oyster would sort of get caught in a small jetty, which has proved to be true. And
Mhm.
so the oyster embryos would be caught within that unit and have to kind of climb up with inside of it. And also that has to do with the layout, the sort of every other one layout. So we have some good results on that. And we've really only tested against one particular product on that. And yeah, so we're feeling pretty good about it. I at some point, I have to move away from the testing, and I know the product is so successful, and start, really working towards, as we're doing now, bringing that cost down and being able to produce close to the project site, so that we can start the good work. Because the longer we wait, I mean, we lose exponential amount of growth every single year.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Okay, just a few more. How different are Hawaiian oysters, and might we test this in Maui to improve water quality in Ma'alaiahara? So I'm assuming that means like how is Hawaiian oysters different from maybe other oysters, or even just the Grow Oyster products? And is that something that could be
Yeah.
tested in Hawaii?
Yeah. So ideally, yes, I've been speaking to some people about this, and in two different harbors, and I would love to do some some tests there, and to be able to see what the conditions are, and what would be the best setup, and and where. Because where is a big is you can have more success in one area because of the water flow than other areas. So it would be great to be able to do that. The Hawaiian oyster, there are two different species, and I should have done my homework. I
It's okay.
apologize.
Take your time.
I know I've looked them up before within this project, but there is some interest, and there is some movement towards this. And so we are trying to get this pilot project done, ideally within this year. It might take 2 years, so it'd be great to come back and talk about that. But the Hawaiian oysters, if we can do it, I mean, there were amazing oysters there, and as happened with the rest of the world, happened, on the islands and the island communities, I believe. And I haven't been able to track this, but I believe that most islands had oysters, but because it's an island, and food sources were sometimes originally scarce, that the oyster was probably just eaten to destruction. So
Mm.
ideally, we could begin to regenerate them on the islands, because they're, talking about shoreline protection. It's an you know it's an obvious thing to do. So I would love to be able to do that. It's way high up on my priority list. And matter of fact, the conversations generated me being here this evening with you all. So looking
Okay,
forward.
last question, because I want to try and respect everybody's time, especially yours. I'm sorry, I apologize if you mentioned this earlier, but how does the CaCO3 concrete hold up to ocean acidification?
So it does incredibly well. I was very pleased with this. I kind of I aimed for this, but the concrete gets a little bit harder over time, and it calcifies on the outside because of the particulate size, as well as the curing process that I use. And so the longer it stays underwater, the harder it gets, and it becomes quite white, in fact. And so it does really well over time. MIT did testing on it, and it comes out at the same as a marine grade concrete, and that is in the early, like right after the 30 days of curing time, which is still very early in concrete's life. So pleased with that, and we'll be doing some more testing with this NSF grant to get some more numbers on that as well. So
Amazing.
yeah, it's good.
Great. No, that's wonderful. I think, okay, that's perfect. That's perfect. Kind of stopping point. Sorry, I wish we had more time. Thank you so much, Evelyn, for being here. And certainly, she did mention, and actually, Evelyn, if I can also get some of the places where people can connect with you, because we will send out a recording of tonight once it's
Okay.
ready. So, if you'd like to provide us your contact, we'll send that out with the recording. But again, mahalo, Evelyn, for being up so late with us. Thank you so much.
Loved it. I,
Everybody who tuned in, thank you for being here. Thank you to the County of Maui. And we want to let you guys know that our next our next speaker series will actually be in person. Yay! The Maui Ocean Center, our friends there have graciously allowed us to use the Sphere Theater. And so we'll be having Nadege Aoki, and she's with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. She's been doing work. We were actually talking about this with Evelyn prior to jumping on today with the soundscapes and helping degraded reefs regenerate using sounds of healthy reefs. So should be a really interesting event. Please keep an eye out for that monthly newsletter, Reef and Brief. There is limited seating because it is the Maui Ocean Center. And so we will have all of that coming out with the Reef and Brief this month. So please keep an eye out for that. And don't forget chocolate tasting July 7th. If you love chocolate and you love the reefs, this is the perfect opportunity. Go support a local business, eat some great chocolate. And of course, a recording of tonight's talk with all of the amazing questions and inventions will be available on our YouTube channel. It will be readily available on Facebook right as soon as we end tonight. And so mahalo to all of our wonderful partners and our supporters. And most of all, mahalo to Evelyn, to all of you, our viewers. Thank you all so much for being with us tonight. And we hope you have a wonderful evening, and aloha ahui ho. We will hopefully see you all in person at the Sphere next month. So until then, please take care, and we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.